If you build something that's useful for yourself, then at least, it's useful for at least one person. And the cool thing about that is that if it's useful for one real person, even if that is you, or it's more likely that there are other people just like you because you're not that unique. That's kind of like something that founders oftentimes have to remember. You're not that unique. And if it's something useful for you, that's much, much more likely to scale than building something that you think might be useful for this other person that you imagine. Like, imagine if doctors could use technology in XYZ way, and you have no idea about the actual problems of doctors.
I'm Owais. I previously founder of a YC company in the machine learning space. There's about 40 of us ex-founders at Notion. There's a lot of us. We've all learned, had different journeys, started different companies, gotten acquired at Notion, joined Notion early. There's a lot of things that we've learned. We thought it'd be useful to share. We're going to talk to each other, share lessons on marketing, brand, design, product. All of us work across the org. Now I'm here with, I'll let Raphael introduce himself.
I'm heading up design for growth in our new apps at Notion, Calendar and Mail. And I previously founded Cron Calendar. And fun fact is that Cron was part of the Winter 20 batch at YC, which is where I actually overlapped with Owais because his startup was also Winter 20. But we overlapped even before that in school at MIT. So we go way back. So awesome to be here today with you, Owais.
I just can't get away from Raphael. We're together, school, yeah, YC, and then now at Notion. I still remember when you joined Notion, it was really special. So it's been awesome to be with you all these years. Um, I think we should just jump right in. The question that I'm the most curious about that I've actually never had a chance to ask you directly, um, and it's kind of Notion related, is, when you think about Notion, anyone in the world can really use it. It's a broad surface area. A lot of people can use the product for many different things. That's a hard situation to build product for. And what you were working on, Cron, in the calendar space was actually pretty similar. And so I just want to start by asking you, how the hell did you tackle such a broad surface area category of calendar? Like, where did you start? Just start there. Like, tell me about that.
Yeah, totally. It's true that every computer has a calendar. Almost everyone that sort of like interacts with technology uses some sort of like calendar application, which is a very intentional choice for me to go after this market. But I still built in a very focused way, and the whole thing actually kind of started more as a toy, which is a common advice that is very helpful for founders and actually kind of just play with technology and kind of start to build something that almost feels a little bit like a toy that can then evolve into something much, much, much bigger. There's really only a few categories of software that are used by a billion plus people. And it's very intentional that, Cron, and Notion ended up acquiring Cron because Notion initially started out as a website builder, and then it kind of stumbled over that sort of like docs. And it's very niche, but it then stumbled over that docs use case, and that's a billion sort of like plus. Reimagining docs is kind of like a billion plus usage market online, and but found it sort of like niche with the wiki, internal wiki space for startups specifically. And there's only that many, so like billion plus use cases. There's docs, calendar is one of them, and then maybe like email, chat messaging applications. And we're now doing the first three that I just mentioned at Notion, kind of building out this whole connected workspace. Do you want to hear a little bit like how maybe like I still built in a very focused way initially, even though it wasn't such a broad category?
Like, I want to know, like, what that first, maybe it was just you. I think you were a solo founder or something. I just want to know, like, what that first uh I don't know, product design session was like. Like, how are we going to build something useful? Like, be very tactical. Like, tell me like what that first, I don't know, week was like when you were like, okay, here's what we're going to build, here's why. What did you do? Like, what was that first, internal, maybe you just talked to one person, like what was that like what was that first design moment like?
Yeah, totally. I can start all the way where it was literally just like a toy, and the only user was me. But that's typically like actually a pretty good place to start. If you build something that's useful for yourself, then at least it's useful for at least one person. And the cool thing about that is that if it's useful for one real person, even if that is you, you know, or it's more likely that there are other people just like you because you're not that unique. That's kind of like something that founders oftentimes have to remember. You're not that unique. And if it's something useful for you, that's much, much more likely to scale than building something that you think might be useful for this other person that you imagine. Like, imagine if doctors could use technology in XYZ way, and you have no idea about the actual problems of doctors. So what I did was I was heavily sort of like relying on my calendar back in so like 2016, 17, 18. But there was no good calendar application that had, you know, kind of the powers that I wanted. And one of the things is like a very small thing, but one of the things that kind of annoyed me in Google Calendar was having all this empty space at the top and the bottom,
Mm,
kind of like in the, you know, from
right.
midnight to sort of like 8 a.m. I just never had meetings, but it was like this big white space. So I built
Yeah.
a Chrome extension that was sort of like hacking into the DOM of Google Calendar and sort of like collapsing. Let me collapse these night hours. And I put that in the store, so like to have it on a different computer. And overnight, they had, you know, 10,000 plus users because other people kind of felt like, yeah, it would be cool to get rid of that
Oh.
space. And so that was the toy that ended up kind of, you know, laying the foundation for a very focused take on the calendar, which then in of
Mm.
itself was the foundation for to build for the sort of like, you know, millions of users.
Oh, so if I had to repeat back to you, what you said is kind of um, build for yourself and make it actually like be pretty discriminating against that. Like build it for yourself and make it useful. And then maybe this thing you aspect, I like this description of like the toy. Start with a toy, but it's actually useful. Like that one thing that makes it really good, and you launch this as an add-on, just like this white space on the calendar, make that really not as open-ended. um, and then what did you do after that? Did you just build on, follow that same structure of like, what's the next thing? I remember share availability was like a big thing even back then. Like I was using Cron back then. So like, yeah, tell me more. Like, what were the next two, three things where you're like, oh wow, like I have an opportunity here. People actually want a new calendar app to use. Like, when did you start to realize that, and how did you approach that?
Totally. And I think, you know, like building for yourself is one approach. I think there's other ways to go about it, but in any case, you just need to understand the user and their problems extremely well. And one way to do that is that you're building for yourself. But there are other ways, such as, you know, talking a bunch to your user, which you should do in any case, but you have to do it even more if you're not familiar with the domain that you're building for. So that aside, um, uh, building a whole sort of like counter application can be very daunting, or even like a whole
Hmm.
email application, or, you know, a whole docs product. And so you kind of need to find a wedge as a next step. Like, how do you actually build sort of like, you know, value on top of the table stakes? And I think building the table stakes can be very daunting, and certainly not something that a solo founder can do during, like, you know, 10 weeks during YC or something like that. So you have to be very strategic how you
Mm.
create value. Like, where in the value stack sort of do you go and apply as much pressure as you can? Like, try to find a single surface area, like as small as possible, and apply as much pressure as you can. And for me, that looked like I didn't want to go like implement the whole calendar. Just like 5 or 10
Yeah.
engineers for like 18 months, you know? Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so I took Google Calendar and loaded that up in a sort of a desktop application environment in Electron, which gave me the advantage that I had like a doc icon, I had native notifications, and at the
Mm.
time, it was right during the pandemic. Zoom really started to take off, and having the ability to just extract Zoom links and then, you know, sending like real notifications just at the beginning of the meeting
Oh,
versus
it's
you have
so
to go
good. Yeah.
hunt through your email and find the link that someone, and then you're on 5, 10 minutes late. Back then it was way less efficient to just hop into a Zoom call. And that was like one small thing without having to build like the whole calendar where you could just stand on the shoulder of giants, but really somehow just, you know, harness 50% of the value of a modern end calendar by building this like 1% of sort of like nifty feature on top of it. And so I kind of encourage people that want to break into big markets, just kind of seek for where along the value stack can you sort of like, you know, just add like 1%, so like effort, and have like outsized impact.
Yeah, I love that. I remember using that add-on, at least maybe it evolved, but the killer feature for me was the telling me when my next meeting was in a very like non-intrusive way, and I could jump to that via Zoom or know the room. So what I remember, and I want to get into a bit, what I do want to talk about is like one, like how did you launch? I also want to talk about the Notion journey real quick and how that's been, and then what you're working on now. Um, but the thing I think a lot of founders ask me too is like, okay, you have this like useful product, you have some early users, you've kind of built this like you have this like toy approach that makes it really useful for yourself and others. But like, how did you think about that first large launch moment? If it was something like that, I remember you had a wait list and friends would message me to message you to get off the wait list. So like, why did you use the wait list? Like, what were the channels specifically that you launched on? Was it Product Hunt, Twitter at the time? Like, how did you think about that initial like, okay, we have something useful. Let's go get a lot more traction. Sure, I'll use a wait list, but like, how did you think about that first major launch moment for Cron?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's maybe quickly talk about sort of like the channels. Sure, there's sort of like a
Mm,
launch moment, and I kind of like used all the common. So like this is 20, 2021. You sort of like Product Hunt. Certainly kind of Twitter. As a YC company, you also use kind of like the internal message board, like Bookface. And a lot of sort of like my personal channels as well. But we didn't do any paid marketing or didn't take like a
yeah.
page out in the New York Times or anything like that or YouTube ad. But like, so there's a launch moment, but then that's just a moment, and it usually really doesn't make or break, your go-to-market motion. It's everything that follows after launch, and for channels,
Mm,
I think one sort of like thing that I thought was a little bit of an insight where I was pretty ruthless about it. Just ended up working really well. I was very ruthless about in which channels to intentionally really invest and try to be like, an 11 out of 10 in those channels and
yeah.
really hone every little aspects of it. And then be very deliberate about just not caring or investing in other channels at all. I don't think I posted on LinkedIn a single time. Maybe not as a good, I'm not like, particular about which channel, just like the formula to really be intentional about the channels you want to own. For me, it was nothing but, and nothing really means like no YouTube, no LinkedIn, no everything else, nothing but email and Twitter at the time, and really really hone it. So, for example, the email game. It was extremely important to me to have extremely beautiful and regular changelog updates that are
Hmm.
tied very closely to the product. These were not marketing or lifecycle onboarding campaigns. These were product update emails that people waited, loved to receive. They looked beautiful. I invested in a bunch in kind of creating custom HTML templates, always super thoughtful about the content, always used language that people would use themselves by reporting bugs or requesting features. I made sure to use the exact language that people used when they were asking for a feature to then use to talk about the feature when we built it. Oftentimes, I think kind of in the product machinery, sausage factory, we kind of forget what people call things like, oh, do the thing, like when you drag, they kind of would describe it when you drag on the grid, do the thing, and then it goes through the whole marketing machinery, and then you call it this fancy sort of like
Yeah.
term or word salad. And so I was very careful what words to use. And then the email for me was great because it was a very bi-directional channel. So
Hmm.
I never used a no replay email address. I never
Mm,
just let emails bounce. I would always sign off every email with "Hey, reply to this email," even though it seems like it's coming from like to a mailing list. Like this is actually me, and so I formed these personal relationships with first tens, then hundreds, then thousands of people that
wow.
would regularly reply to these change logs, adding on more feature requests or just loving it,
Yeah.
where I got the opportunity to link to a tweet and then they would go and follow the tweet and like the tweet. The hero image of the changelog oftentimes was a link to a tweet with the video. So there was this sort of like ping pong that I did between Twitter and email that I think this is the first time I'm talking about this, but it was very intentionally designed. This sort of like whole marketing machinery or go to market machinery between email, user feedback, support tickets, Twitter, a little bit of design porn in a way where you kind of have like these, nice little interaction gifs on Twitter that I know knew work really well into like the design Twitter sphere. And so that was sort of like the Cron early sort of like excitement building and playbook, just really going super deep on these two channels and really leveraging sort of like the crossing of the two. Today in 2025, would I still do it the same way? I don't think so. But I'm sure there's
Mm,
something similar like that even today that founders can use. Is that helpful? Does that make sense?
yeah, I mean, I'd say, tell me you're a designer without telling me you're a designer. The whole flow that you set up, I mean, you very much approach it as a design problem. Yeah.
Always, can I actually ask you a question?
Yeah.
A little bit about sort of like the go-to market side. Um, so take us back to Notion when you joined. I think it was around end of 22, right around the time when Cron started to take off. How
Yeah.
how big or small was Notion back then when you joined?
Yeah, in 2020, it was 60 people, a very small marketing team. I just think just a couple people. And I came in just to figure out like self-serve revenue roughly. We have all this inbound users and revenue and teams using us, figure out what's going on.
And do you remember what was sort of like the vibe on the internet back then when you joined? Like, what was, I mean, TikTok wasn't really a thing yet, I think. What was, Twitter was not X yet. Like, can you describe a little, like, what was the vibe for you as you saw it?
I think it's always hindsight is 2020. It's like very clear now what was going on. Um, I think at the time, what you realized, and this has been the case for a while, and I think why Notion took off, especially at that time, literally like a couple months after, I think we went viral on TikTok. It really took off. Word of mouth was really like ramping up. Um, and the core reason I think that happened with Notion is Notion was one of the first software products that deeply, deeply cared about the design, the aesthetic, the usage, design, but also being useful. So when you think about Notion, it's really like sort of this uh, workspace that doesn't really have a lot of boundaries, right? I can connect a page to a note, to a task, to now calendar. Um, it's very boundless. And the design and the experience of that really, really just appealed to people in a space, in a market where I think a lot of the legacy software products followed like one design aesthetic or one way of doing things. They were quite rigid. They didn't let people kind of customize and build their own thing that speaks to them in their personal life or at work or whatever the case is. Um, I think we just tapped into that moment in a very deep way. Obviously, that happens. It doesn't happen in that moment. It happens compounding over time, caring about the smallest details, the smallest design details, the smallest copy details, consistently doing that. In some ways, I would actually based on what you were saying about that journey, like you were so thoughtful about just a couple of channels, is kind of what we actually did early days. Just off of like Twitter, I think at the time, TikTok, and really, really focusing on our community that amplified all these um, channels and whatever channels they were in. But it was really only a couple channels actually. We really seeded the community, and I think maybe even for you you can tell me if I'm wrong, but it really drove a lot of word of mouth. Everybody wants to figure out like how to do word of mouth. And the reality is like it doesn't happen overnight. You have to spend a lot of time like compounding the smallest details, caring about the smallest details, and that's what spoke to people. I remember one of the most
Yeah.
viral TikTok posts was just like some influencer student who shared her like personal dashboard and it really looked so beautiful that even I wanted it and that went viral on TikTok. But that just
Yeah,
showed like many decisions ahead of that to make that possible. Does that answer your question?
totally. And I think maybe kind of to extract a lesson from it, how to do word of mouth is one, build a great product people actually want to talk about, and then two, make it
Yeah.
easy for people to talk about it. In the
Yeah.
case of Notion, this might have been sort of like the emergence of TikTok at the same time. Maybe templates fostering the community.
Yeah.
But step one, build a great product.
Exactly.
That's hard, and that's kind of where most of the effort should go. And then so like to really unlock magic, step two, make it easy or and compelling for people to actually talk about a product. This could also be we had in Cron, we had a command K refer a friend and create some of that scarcity.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Right. And
Yes.
so,
Yes.
do you remember? Right. And so, build sort of like, this making it easy to talk about your product once you do want to talk about it because you like it. It's a good product. Um,
100%.
this could also be like, how can you build that in software? Right.
Yeah.
Make it easy to share, make it scarce. In some cases, that works. Or share a template, get kudos and a retweet of like retweeting and design detail. There's a lot of play.
I would just add, I loved your framing of the changelog. What at Notion, call it release marketing. I think in a lot of places, like it's really undervalued. It's just like, okay, we ship this list of features. Here's some improvements. Here's some bullet list, and go for it. But actually, what people miss, and I think we've done consistently, and I remember I used to do this with Cron, turn that into like the one of the best moments to connect with your existing users that are going to drive your word of mouth. I think it's very much related. How do you do that? Um, Thoughtful copy that speaks to the feature, makes it easy to understand, a visual that makes it easy to demonstrate, and then make it easy to share and focus on a couple of channels and let them experience that moment in the app. Um, and then the deeper layer is like, it's often this like brand moment constantly, every single month. Like it's our brand moment to continuously reinforce um, what Ivan, our founder, believes about the brand, what we care about, do it in an organized way, but we can do that consistently. So you could, no matter how big you are, you have to use the change log as an advantage.
One of the most powerful things that I ever did with Cron was to close loops with users. When users requested a
Mm,
feature,
yeah, yeah.
even when it was a year ago, I would take a note and go close that loop once it shipped. And and the reactions to this was always over the top. Imagine you are just a person on the internet using a piece of software, and you write, like bottom right question mark. You go send feedback. Thing doesn't work as I want it. Send. Forget about it. Right. 9 months later, you get an email from the founder. Hey, look, we just shared a change log an hour ago. This bullet here is actually based on your feedback and now works exactly how you want it. And there's like, oh, this was 9 months ago. Holy cow! How did this person, remember and then take the time to actually clearly individually reply? And so I think that's one of the most powerful things that you can do early stage, kind of one of the sort of like do things that don't scale
Yeah.
early on, which is super powerful to create the first sort of like thousand true fans. And I think there are ways to actually scale this further than you think.
Mhm.
First of all, the way I did it is just like kind of like bite off more than you can chew and then chew it. I just kept doing it nights and weekends, just like thousands of emails and just kept to-do
That's
lists
insane.
or like lists with just like, oh, this feature, here are the, 178 people that requested it with their Twitter handle, email address, backlink, etc. So I kind of just did it manually like crazy for way too long, or maybe not way too long,
Yeah.
but for really long. But I think there's maybe ways to, with AI, to make this previously unscalable, but extremely personal touch, an extremely powerful, sort of like, go to market unlock,
Yep.
more scalable, right? This is something where I also like, how can you use Notion, the product, with its AI powers and
Hmm.
databases and, CRM syncing, etc. How can you build a template or a system in Notion to sort of like create this go-to-market product market fit engine inside Notion and ship it to users? I'm sure like some creator can probably charge money for like a template that just creates this whole engine and machine. So free idea.
Yeah, no, we actually do that. We do a version of that internally at Notion
Oh,
where we just
amazing.
categorize everything in a database, every single point of user feedback. And it just goes into a Notion database and we're auto tagging those things. But yeah, definitely.
How do we close loops? Like, how do we reach out to users once we ship something?
I think we do it in different channels. The first one is release marketing, right? Like specific focus, use a lot of the channels that we have, the general marketing channels that we use now. But then like the close the loop sort of thing you're mentioning, we do that on a personal basis. You can do that at scale with tools like I think the tool we were using is like outbound tool like Outreach, where you have a list of emails for people that requested it. You still try to make those emails personal because often the smaller features, there's a couple hundred maybe that requested it, but that compounds over time. That turns into a
Totally.
lot of people over time. So you can do that pretty quickly. And so do that. Like everyone like do things that don't scale. Like you still want to, no matter how big you get, like you can't just become a generic, SaaS company that, loses its
Well, you
identity from the
can,
early
and
days.
too
Well,
many
you
do,
can.
right? Yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah.
like that's not fun. That's pretty boring. And that's not why people came to you in the first place.
Yeah, and to be completely fair, I think, yeah, I think we can do a better job there. Actually, I've definitely kind of seen people, say like, oh, Notion has now gotten to the scale where it becomes like, less personal,
Yeah,
personable or personal, and I would be curious to explore. It sounds like we're kind of like doing a lot of good things in the direction there, but as things scale, it gets harder and harder.
100%. Related to Notion and scale, I really quickly did want to ask you. I don't think I've heard the story directly from you. I don't know if it's a story, but I just want to know like a little bit of details on, Cron was doing well, and you decided to sell the company and join Notion. Um, Maybe just tell me like the underlying reasons of that, how it relates to some of the other things we've been talking about in our conversation. Um, like yeah, like why Notion specifically, and then what's that experience been afterwards? I just want to hear some learnings from that. I know you've shared a lot about the story before, maybe, but maybe things that you haven't shared that are useful for what we're talking about.
Yeah, to not repeat myself, I think um, maybe what makes Notion special as a company is sort of like this idea that we're building Lego blocks for software, and with in those Lego blocks there was a missing piece around anything like time and calendar. And this is like the missing puzzle piece, or I guess Lego block, where that Cron to like brought to the table, helping eventually move Notion to become a multi-product company, paving the path to even further expand into email now. And now we have this emergent, so like connected workspace. And this is a pretty unique way how we sort of like constructed this connected workspace. And there's not many other companies where this would have sort of like fit it. So that's kind of like one way to look at it. So like Legos for software. I think the other way is that reaching product market fit and sort of like scale and finding a go to market to like motion that works. That's kind of one thing. And Cron was growing a ton, and worked. It really worked out there. The other thing is kind of like, okay, now build a business. And Notion has sort of like figured out how to monetize the docs database and sort of like wiki part, to some degree, right?
Yeah,
And my idea for Cron was sort of like a three-step plan. Like one, but well, let me take a step back. I always just kind of wanted to build Cron. Why build a calendar in the first place? Well, I really care about kind of moving the world closer to a place where everyone makes the most of their time. And building a like kick-ass calendar is like a pretty direct way to do that. Um, but I really kind of wanted to. I saw the big opportunity in reimagining, so like the time layer for the internet, like within organizations, across organizations, kind of what maybe to some degree, so like chat, like Slack is kind of the communication fabric inside organizations, and could have been across organizations as well. We sort of like connect, and I wanted to figure out what's sort of like the time fabric inside and across organizations, and build sort of like the time layer for the internet. And so step one there was sort of like, well, build the best calendar for professionals and teams first. That's so like, Cron circa 2022. And there were ideas to then monetize basically the calendar. I didn't think calendar could really be something to be charged for, like calendar in of itself. So for me, it was always like, well, you build the best calendar, give it away for free, basically, and then monetize sort of calendar adjacent use cases that create value, such as note taking, meeting, note taking, kind of planning, tasks, project planning, etc., as it relates to calendar, as well as sort of like scheduling, coordinating, Calendly style flows, share availabilities, so like executive assistant. Those were kind of like the three areas where I saw like, oh, you can monetize value on top of having a kick-ass sort of like core calendar. So that would have been step two, figuring all that out. And then step three, build a time layer for the internet. Um, and Notion has sort of like figured out that step two, monetize aspects of sort of like a docs product. Um, and that was still something TBD for Cron. And so like plugging into the Notion, you know, business machinery, so like solves that for calendar.
Got it. Really helpful. The last thing I kind of was hoping to end on. So I'm sure you get asked a lot of questions nowadays about founders starting companies now. A lot of companies are trying to build AI native. Just curious, like general advice you give them. Maybe I'd phrase the first question I want to ask you as, what would you do differently if you're starting again in 2025?
If I started again today, as tools, get ever better and building gets cheaper with I would focus on distribution. What remains scarce? Because attention remains fixed. And so I would really focus on having a plan for like the scarce thing now that building becomes more abundant.
Yeah, I think you gave a great like deep dive into how you thought about distribution that worked really, really well early days too. So I think that resonates with what you said earlier. Uh, what's My second question is like, what's one lesson today, maybe even at Notion now, that's helped you build better? Maybe things have changed. You're using AI tools. I don't know, but really curious to know now what's helping you.
Yeah, totally. So for me personally, as we build more stuff and building in general kind of gets cheaper, I don't think you can really afford to do expensive, high fidelity designs anymore. You need to be super quick and find a way to capture and express your ideas just super quickly. And for me personally, that's sketching with pen and papers. Doesn't have to be fancy. It can be in a little notebook like this. And then boom, basically get into building mode right from there.
That's awesome. Um, and then yeah, last like, so you get asked a lot of questions by founders, just general advice. Like, what's one piece of advice you'd give to a founder just starting a company now?
I think the basics remain true. Just start small, uh, build products, try to create a wedge into something, and talk to users, and then rinse and repeat.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add to that, I agree with you. The only thing I'd add to that is whether you like it or not from day one and you have early users, you have a brand, be really, really thoughtful in the early days about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and care about the story and the narrative of your company, the features you're launching is also a design problem, a product problem, and think about it intentionally from the first day. It's related to design being really important in the early days too now.
Totally beautiful. It's a good point to end, Owais.
Thanks so much, Raphael. It was fun to talk.
Yeah, thank you. Likewise, and see you soon.
See you soon, man.
Bye.